Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome one and all to the Defiant Takes Football Show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at @TheMaxDean, and I am back per Monday with Kyron Samuels at Kyron Samuels on Twitter. He is our offensive line expert and insider here at Defiant Takes Football, and we are going to be talking about an offensive position, not offensive line, but wide receiver. We're going to be ranking our top 10 receivers. We're going to go back and forth. It's a little off-season ranking content, just something to keep the conversation going. How you doing today, Kyron?
Doing pretty good, man. This is an interesting topic because I know wide receiver is one of the most highly debated positions because everybody has a preference and what they like, and the numbers are so close that everybody has a fair argument. But I think we're going to have a pretty different list, so I'm interested to get into it.
You sent me yours. I just barely looked at it. So our lists may be different. They may be close. I honestly don't know at this point. But, we're starting off with a bang. We're going receivers. Everybody likes to talk receivers. Then we're going to close all of our rankings with quarterback, right? So we're going to start with bang and finish with maybe the most controversial at the very end of it all. But yes, so receivers today, we're going to start at 10, go down to 1. At the end, we can throw in a couple of honorable mentions, guys that we think are knocking on the door or maybe could be, but we just left off for whatever reason, maybe personal preference or whatever the case may be. We're going to jump right into it and get the show started. So at number 10, we have Terry McLaurin for me and Devontae Smith for you. So I definitely like Devontae Smith quite a bit. He's definitely, just on the outside knocking on the door for me. McLaurin, I feel like he gets the number one role. It's a little bit harder for him with the situation down in Washington versus Devontae Smith. So, I mean, I could get the argument, but I'm going to give it to the guy who has to do the majority of the work there. So why did you put Devontae Smith as your number 10 receiver?
Well, I think he's just one of the most smooth and efficient route runners in the game. You also talk about a guy that can go make the contested tough catches for you, who really commands the presence of the defense. And you see a lot of the times, A.J. Brown on the other side, he gets some attention, but they can't really double A.J. Brown because this guy's on the same level. It's actually a debate. I mean, when A.J. Brown went down a couple games, you saw Smitty kind of take the role there at the last half of the season and into the first round of the playoffs. Smitty was probably the guy that had the most success right there. He was the one that was really starting to take over that offense. And then A.J. Brown had a monster game in the Super Bowl. But for the last 8-9 games there, Smitty was, the guy for that team. So I really do appreciate what he brings to the table in terms of route running and efficiency. And just his tough contested catchability, man. Like, you're not going to be able to create separation every time. It's the NFL. You're going to have to make those tough catches and make your quarterback look good sometimes. And he makes his quarterback look really good. Jalen Hurts had a hell of a year, proved a lot. But sometimes, man, Smitty and AJ can make him look just incredible with some of the stuff they're able to do. And it adds up over the course of a season. So I appreciate what he brings to the table in that aspect.
Yeah, I get that. I think for me, it's
also one more thing. And he has limited opportunity as well. We talk about He has another guy opposite him. So I think about what he would be able to do if he was just the standalone feature number one in an offense. His numbers, he's gone over 1,000 yards both seasons. So if he was able to just stand alone by himself, I think it'd be even crazier. So I'm excited to see him progress forward because he's so efficient with what he has.
Yeah, well, he has to give up a lot of touches to A.J. Brown. He's got to give up a lot of touches to Dallas Goedert. He's got to give up a lot of touches in the run game and the quarterback run game as well, because obviously the Eagles run the ball a lot. So in terms of overall touches, yeah, he's hindered a little bit. And I think, me not having him in my top 10 could definitely be largely attributed to the fact that he doesn't have a role like that, because it's really, really, really hard to get into the top 10 list as a second receiver for me. It's just the way that it is, partly because you get the limited touches, and plus you have the built-in, excuse or whatever you want to call it, that the pressure is taken off of you to some degree by another receiver, or maybe it's just the stellar quarterback play as well. So that's funny, get it.
I think I have two more number 2s in my top 10. So it'll be interesting to see when we talk about this how it goes. But I don't disagree with the point. It's just when I talk about it, it's just more like from just the pure standpoint of route running, catching ability, finding space, getting hands off you, stuff like that, more or less than the actual production or the numbers that go with that. So that's kind of like, I think that was important to note for me. Maybe not as much based on numbers as it is like the
Sure.
running routes and being a receiver.
Yeah, I get that. And I think that, he has actually had a better chance of getting in than somebody else that I'm not going to name yet, but I didn't put it in my top 10 for skill reasons and not production reasons, right? Because it's tough. There's a lot of flavor that goes into this. Are you a guy who believes in if you can just get the guy to a ball in space and then he can make things happen? Does that elevate him in terms of where you want to rank him, or does the ability to separate or make those contested catches, is that what elevates a player into this type of ranking for you? So, but yeah, no, I mean, I'm not going to say that being a secondary receiver automatically disqualifies you from my top 10 ranking, but it does make it very challenging. And unfortunately for Devontae, however much he might care, he is not in my top 10. All right, and so I had Terry McLaurin. So McLaurin, I feel like he does a tremendous job in Washington. He is the number one receiver by a long shot. They had a relatively successful run game. They're not devoid of talent by any stretch, but I feel like the offense runs because of McLaurin, especially when you had, what's the name of the quarterback there? Once you had
Carson Wentz was there for a while, and then
once he was out,
Taylor Heineke was there.
Once you had Heineke come in, then you really saw the production of the offense elevate, and that's just because Heineke was willing to just force feed the ball to McLaurin, and he could make it happen, and he could make it work. And maybe it was a weak division. I mean, it certainly was a weak division, but they were very nearly a playoff team. Excuse me, it was a weak conference, not weak division. Excuse me. But they were very nearly a playoff team last year, and I don't think that would have been even anywhere remotely in that conversation if it's not for a player like Terry McLaurin who could really put the offense on his back. They've got other good players. I'm not taking anything away from the kid they took out of Penn State last year.
Jahan Dotson. He's pretty.
Yeah.
They have good secondary guys. Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel. Then they got the underneath guy with a tight end. So they have a decent support system, but he's the number one for sure.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Moving down to number 9. All right. So I had Cooper Kupp and you had DeAndre Hopkins. So Hopkins missed a fair amount of the year last year, but came on strong once he came back. So what is it that specifically puts him at number 9 for you?
Well, he's really actually like in my top 5. He's a lot higher than this. I just out of respect for the last season and what some of these other guys were able to accomplish, I bumped him down a bit. But to me, DeAndre Hopkins, when he's healthy, there's only like 3 guys that I think are in the same ballpark as him, and they'll be mentioned later. But what DeAndre Hopkins did, I mean, he played 8 games, I believe. In those 8 games, he went for 50-something catches. He had 700-something yards, 6 touchdowns. I mean, he was the leading receiver in the NFL during his time that he played. And then he ended up sitting out the last game of the season. But for the stretch that he played, there wasn't a better receiver in football, and the numbers reflected that. So I love DeAndre Hopkins. He's my favorite player in the NFL. So I'm a little bit biased here, but I thought I was fair with dropping him down to 9 instead of keeping him top 5 because what he's able to do, I mean, he can do it stationary. He can do it he can go just sit at X and go play at the X and kill you from there. He can go in the slot and play in the slot, kill you from the slot. He has all the routes you can ask him run. He's not a fast guy. He ran 4.57, and that was 10 years ago coming out of Clemson. But you can't tackle the guy. You can't get this guy off his mark. You can't get this guy away from finding the space. And when I say finding the space, it's just like you see a lot of coverage, zone coverages, quarters, cover 2 stuff. Finding the open areas, getting there, even though it may not be the design route from the beginning, finding the space, sitting in the space, giving your quarterback an easy target to throw to. You talk about a quarterback's best friend. I don't think you can ask for a better best friend than DeAndre Hopkins, a guy that makes it easy for you, that creates separation, that gets those easy window throws for you to make. And I don't think anybody does it better than DeAndre Hopkins. And we've seen it over the course of his career. He has I think he had 3 drops the last 6-7 seasons, something crazy like that. He went a season and a half without having a drop. So he has, in my opinion, the best hands in the NFL as well. So when you couple that together with all the things he's able to do, just with creating mismatches and wherever you put him, he's the guy. He's going to be in my top 10 until he retires, unless there's a significant drop off in production, like say a Julio Jones, where we know how great he once was, but now he's not at that caliber anymore. But we haven't seen that with DeAndre Hopkins. When he's been on the field, he's been at the top tier. He's been elite. So he's going to be in my top 10 for sure.
Yeah, I definitely get that, and I don't think you have to look at stats to know he has great hands. I mean, the eye test is there. He catches everything that comes his way. He's probably caught more than his fair share of balls that wouldn't even be qualified as drops. He's still
Right.
because he just catches it from any position that he's in, any place on the field, with any level of contested ability. I mean, there was the incredible catch that he had on the Hail Mary against Buffalo a couple of years ago, but just on a play-by-play basis, he just brings in everything that he should and many things that he probably shouldn't. So the hands are incredible. The ability to separate is pretty incredible. I think he commands an offense, or he commands a defense to respect him in a way that very few of these other guys do. And in one-on-one coverage, it's really hard for anyone to really truly match up with him. And I similarly put him a little bit down the list, but I actually have him a little bit higher than you, right? So in terms of how good he's been over the course of his career, he probably is rated unfairly low for both of us, but just based on the fact that he missed a fair amount of time last year, he's down a little bit, but I actually gave him a little bit more credit than you even did here. And for me, Cooper Kupp, Kupp is a player who missed time last year, and he may not have all of the traits that everybody else does, but I think the refinement is incredible, right? And so you get him on the move, you put him in different kinds of matchups, whatever you need to do to put him in the best situation. What without a shadow of a doubt is that he will take advantage of that and do everything exactly the way that it needs to be done, right? He reads the defense as well as any quarterback. He knows exactly where all of his marks are. He will be keyed in with the quarterback, no matter who that is, and you can trust that. And I think, him at 9, for me, is a recognition that the traits are not there in the same way that some of these other guys are, where you can't just line him up at X and just say, go get open. Play after play after play after play. You're not going to get the best production out of him. You do need to move him around and put him in ideal situations. But his consistency and his technical refinement and his ability to guarantee what you set him up for means he has to be in the top 10 for me. And then he probably would have been a little bit higher if he wasn't hurt last year. So he's at 9 for me. So how do you feel about Kupp? I know we've talked a little bit about it in the past, but another opportunity to get your thoughts out on him.
I like Cooper Kupp a lot. I think what he brings to the game is very clear and apparent. He's been that way since he was at Eastern Washington. I was got to play against him in college when he was at Eastern Washington. I was at Jacksonville State, and he's been that way for a long time. They had, talking about a squad, they had a really good squad there. They had, Vernon Adams playing quarterback, who's doing really good things in the CFL. But then they had Cooper Kupp. Kendrick Bourne was the number 2 receiver, and then they had another guy. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but he ended up playing in the NFL for a couple of years. So it was really cool to see all those guys together and where they are now. But the skill set is very apparent. But he's not a guy that, and why I knocked Kupp down a bunch of steps is not because of production. Because if you look at the numbers, cool, we know what the numbers say, and that's just is what it is. There's no denying that. There's no debating that. There's no debating how he gets open. He's crafty. But I think more than most of the guys in this top 10, you talk about a guy who gets schemed open a lot and gets his target share is absolutely insane the last few years when he's, been the guy in Los Angeles. So I don't knock him for that. But when we're talking about actual craft of playing receiver and being able to do multiple things at not just an acceptable level, but at a high level, I don't think he's as talented and as proficient as some of these guys in that. But again, does that matter? No, you're running the West Coast offense with Sean McVay, and you're getting a lot of bootlegs, you're getting a lot of your quick hitting stuff, you're getting a lot of one-on-ones in the slots, and there isn't a better receiver for that in the NFL right now. So I give him all the credit in the world for that. So even though I'm not going to have him as high, or he's not in my top 10 at all right now, based off the last season, which is kind of, I'm probably being a little unfair here, but when I look at my list, I like those guys. I don't think any of those guys are better at him, I don't think Kupp is better than those guys at receiver right now. But listen, like I said, I love his production. I love his ability in the slot. He's like, and this is not a slight to him. I don't want to sound disrespectful. He's like the souped up version of Julian Edelman. But think about like how good Julian Edelman was. He was incredible. So you take a guy like that and you give him a couple more inches, you give him a little bit more weight on the body, and you let him get in space, and you give him 15, 20 targets a game. This is the type of production you're going to get. So while he's not as high as he might be for other people, for me, I really do appreciate his skill set and what he brings to the table, and he's having a hell of a career.
Yeah, it's tough. It really is about flavor. You know what I mean? Like I said, how much do you value getting open? How much do you value consistency? How much do you value hands? How much do you value explosiveness? And how much do you value just the ability to make things happen after the catch? There's a lot that goes into it. And I don't know if I could give you a list of things that qualify my players in the order in which I do. It's just more about a feel. It's about eye test.
Right.
It's not about stats. So it's just about, I guess, really the way that it comes down to is how badly would I want this player on my squad, right? Because even
I
if
like that.
he isn't winning at X, and again, if you take age out of it, right? Like if you're like, yeah, he's great, but he might only have 2 years. If we're going to ignore that in price, then how badly would I want this guy on my team this year if all else doesn't matter? This is essentially the way that I would classify the list for myself, because even if you can't just line him up at X, if he's going to generate that level of production for you, then I'll take that, right? All right. So moving on to number 8. Oops. All right. So I have Stephon Diggs here. You have Mike Evans. Okay. So let's start with you first. So Mike Evans, I did not have him on here, which I feel like is disrespectful in a little bit, only because I would have had him on here pretty much every year for the past 8 years of his career, right? So he's definitely been a top 10 level guy for me all the way throughout. I think at this point, talent would probably put him on here, maybe over a guy like McLaurin, but the injuries, the production at this point, it's dipping a little bit. So if we're entering 2023 and we're saying, how badly do I want this guy on my roster? I think I want to take the guy that's just a little bit more consistent, right? Like, because Evans is missing games throughout the course of the year now, and he plays such a physical style, it would be probably not the most reasonable to expect that to diminish. We're probably going to see him miss just as much, if not maybe slightly more as last year. And I think he's a great player. And I still think he can do incredible things. And I still think he's at the top of the league, or around the top of the league. He's just not quite top 10 for me. So you can sell me on why Mike Evans is still a top 10 wide receiver.
Well, he's still a top 10 receiver for the challenges that he presents a defense, vertically, for one, 2 with his physicality, and 3 with his imposing ability. And when you're talking about the red zone, there's still very few guys that are the guy you want to have in the red zone more than Mike Evans. When you need a one-on-one 50-50 ball, there's not many guys that you want to throw the ball to above Mike Evans. And then, like I said, I'm not going to knock that. Like for Cooper Kupp, I'm not going to knock him for his production, but for a guy like Mike Evans, I think you could use his production to make the argument, because people say that he might be falling off for a little bit, or the step isn't the same. He's missing games, this and that. But the production is still immense for the time that he is on the field. And he isn't to a point where he's just like missing so much time that you have to factor that in my opinion. He's the first receiver in NFL history with 9 straight 1,000-yard seasons. Nobody's ever done it. It's literally never been done. So when I'm factoring that in, it's like I think about what he brings to the table, the way he plays the game, and you get production off of that. For him to be as consistent as he is with his production, it's very hard to get 1,000 yards in the National Football League, even as much as we're throwing. You're throwing the ball a lot. I mean, Brady, I think the Bucs threw the ball maybe second or third most times in the NFL, but most of that's like quick hitting stuff. If you watch the Bucs play, the passing game was the run game, like throwing screens to Godwin, throwing little tunnels, throwing quick hitting stuff to those guys. Was half the offense, if we're being honest. So it wasn't like he had a ton of opportunity down the field, vertical stuff, but he made the most of them. And like I said, when I'm factoring in all that, and the production and the consistency, Mike Evans has to be up there for me, because he started off the season very hot. The middle of the season got a little cool, but those last 3 or 4 games, we started to see him pick it up. I don't know if it's incentive based or if it was just like Brady's like, all right, it's winning time. It's time to just get the ball to my guy. But we still saw what he had left in a lot of those games. And I think he can even climb the rankings for me, because if you watch the play last year, he left a lot on the table, man. There were some drops that were unlike, you don't see him drop the ball a lot. There's some like weird drops. I think the first time they played Carolina, he dropped a 75-yard touchdown and hit him in the hands and he dropped it. But he still found a way to bounce back, get over 1,000 yards, have a significant impact on the game. And I just think with his consistency of production, I have to keep him in my top 10.
Yeah, I get it. I think some of the lack of production earlier last year was due to being banged up. I don't think that he missed a ton of time, but it worries me a little bit more when I see guys missing time throughout the year due to nagging injuries as they get a little older versus a guy who might be in his mid to late 20s who misses like the bulk of a season just due to one injury, because one is usually like telling of things to come. The other one, it's a toss up whether that's going to be like a lingering injury or they're just going to recover fully, right? So for me, I think, he turned it on. Certainly, I think he played hurt. I think that he struggled a little bit more earlier in the season last year. I mean, being on the same page with Brady seemed like a thing last year too, and I just don't know if that was him not hitting his marks. I haven't gone back and watched all 22 for the Bucs. I'm not going to lie, like I haven't. So, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more maybe before the conversation. But ultimately, just when you're watching on Sundays, he just didn't quite look right out there, and I think that's the simplest way that I can put it. And so for me, he's just outside. Could he come back with a bounce back year this year? He might, but I'm also wondering with their quarterback situation, could this possibly be the end of his prolific streak of 1,000-yard seasons? I don't want it to be, certainly, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think it's hard. It gets harder and harder. And we'll see. We'll see. He's a player that's been extremely fun to watch, and he exemplified the old school X receiver for the majority of this past decade. And, I know that the league is moving towards some smaller players at this point, but at the receiver position, but I do hope that we get at least a few more years of the 6'5" dude on the outside who just can go up and score a bunch of touchdowns and everybody. But it just wasn't quite enough to get onto my list this year. All right. At number, we didn't even talk about Stephon Diggs. So Diggs, for me, Diggs is awesome. I thought that he took a little bit of a step back last year. I still think he's very, very good. I think he struggled to get open a little bit more often at times. His production wasn't quite as good as it's been over the past few years. He still had over 1,400 yards. What was his production the past couple of years before this? Because 1,400 yards is a lot, but I still feel like he did take a little bit of a step down in terms of it. I think maybe it was a little bit more streaky, because if I'm just looking back to how I was feeling about him through the season last year, I think there were at least a few games where he just didn't put up much in the way of numbers. And it didn't always feel like he had those clutch situational catches the way that he did in previous seasons, where he definitely built up the stats, but I don't think that I don't know that
this is a bigger conversation because I would say it's a quarterback thing and not a Stephon Diggs thing, but that's another conversation for another day. We'll talk about that in 3 weeks.
All right. Yeah, it's going to be a little while, but all right. So, I think he still got the speed. I think he still has the route running. To put him right now in the top 5 of receivers, I just didn't feel like he had that level of impact on the games. You know what I mean? I felt like the Bills' offense was not as efficient, right? And, I guess maybe some of that's expected. They had a new offensive coordinator. Some of the guys changed. Some of the offensive line moved around. Josh Allen had his most turnover-prone season for a little while over, since 2020 when he really broke out, I think. So, I can't necessarily put it all on him, but it felt like in 2020 and 2021, he was essentially unstoppable. I did not have that feeling from him this past year. I want to take a look at his game by game splits here, but I know that you like him a little bit better than I do. So why don't you make the case for him while I look this up real quick?
Well, I like him a lot more than you like him. We'll have to. I don't want to spoil it, but he's fairly high on my list. So I probably would like to wait. I'll just give a little bit though. He does it, I think, the hardest way, or he has to do it the hardest way for anybody, with the exception of maybe a Devontae Adams. When you talk and the DeAndre Hopkins as well, when you talk about guys who have to be a little bit of everything, because the rest of the core, while they may be solid, they're not anywhere close to the same stratosphere of player. He has to be the stationary X when you need that guy. He has to sometimes be the slot guy. He has to sometimes get on the outside and play weak side and get the matchups with some of the number one corners. I mean, he has to do everything, and he does it in one of the toughest conferences. If we're talking about defensive back play, everybody in the AFC East has superb defensive back play. You look at the Jets, you look at the Dolphins, you look at the Patriots especially. All these guys that have legit number one corners, legit safeties that you're not going to be able to get. And the thing is, they're game planning to take away Stephon Diggs in a way that they're not going to game play to take away, let's say, I don't want to keep going back to this guy, but a Cooper Kupp, or let's say even a Devontae Smith that we talked about prior. They're not game planning to take those guys away the way they're game planning to take Stephon Diggs away. You talk to Bill Belichick, you talk to these guys that have to go against them twice a year, and they'll tell you they're not going to let Stephon Diggs beat them. He still finds a way to end up with 6-7 catches, 80 yards, a touchdown, something. He's productive, and that's what it is. That's why I have him so high, because he has to do it probably the hardest way, and he has the skill to do it and get it done.
Yeah, I'm not sure why, because he ultimately he had better stats than he even did last year, but it just seemed
It's just
easier
uglier this year because the offense wasn't as smooth and efficient.
Yeah, it was uglier, and I think the majority of his games he did well. There was a stretch later in the season where in week 13, 14, and 15 he had 37 yards, 60 yards, and 26 yards. And I don't know if that I just remember looking back at that and kind of having my opinion colored by that. But I'm not even sure that it was just necessarily, and then a few weeks before he had 48 yards. But, again, mixed in there, he had plenty of games over 100 yards. He had a 148-yard game against Kansas City when they beat the Chiefs earlier in the season. So I don't know. I think it's just it's a feeling that's kind of indescribable, and maybe it really just isn't his fault. Maybe he really should be higher than me, or be higher for me. But it's like, again, at the same time, ultimately, when I look at the guys that I have ranked higher than him, it's like, who am I bumping down the list, right? And I mean, you obviously know because you have him higher and you've got guys below him, but I just have a hard time moving anybody else farther down. I guess my next guy might be a guy that you could justify moving him a little bit farther down, because at 7, I have DeAndre Hopkins. You have him a little bit lower, but I think it's just a flavor thing between the two at this point, right? One doesn't quite have the same burst speed, but has, like we talked about, the ability to catch the ball in any kind of situation and great route running. I love watching DeAndre Hopkins play because he looks weird because he's not that fast, but maybe has the best body control among all wide receivers. His ability to just go from vertical to horizontal in the way that he moves, it's pretty rare. I mean, he takes these really long steps sometimes. He's kind of a lanky player. He takes these really long steps that are just so smooth when he changes direction that it looks unnatural. But should you put Stephon Diggs over DeAndre Hopkins? I guess depending on the week, you should. But that's a tough one. So you had AJ Brown at 7. So what puts Brown at 7 for you here?
All right. So take all the things that Mike Evans does extremely well, and then you put it in a body that's 3 inches shorter, probably not as stout, but has a little bit more athleticism and pop after the catch. and that's what you get in AJ Brown. You talk about physicality, the verticality of his game, yards after catch. I mean, he's not Debo after the catch, but he's still very, very good after the catch. He's just an imposing figure when you talk about a receiver. He has more of the hybrid running back type. When you talk about the Debos of the world, the Debos, the AJ Browns, even the DK Metcalfs to a certain extent, the physicalness of the way they run their routes, they get defensive backs off of them. They win the 50-50 jump balls, all the little stuff that you come expect from those guys. He does that at a very high level. And I think he has a little bit more pop and juice after the catch than the DKs and the Mike Evans of the world. And when you couple that with the fact that they got him for so cheap, I just still can't get over it. How the fact that the Eagles of all teams got this guy for essentially nothing. And he's turned out to be, I mean, you saw Jalen Hurts was a good quarterback that second season. You saw him help lead that team to the playoffs. And I think he played decent in the playoff game, especially for a second-year quarterback, in his first playoff game on the road against the defending champs. But you see the step that they made. Devontae Smith obviously taking another step in his development. But just the attention that A.J. Brown commanded, you saw that Eagles offense open up in a way that it hadn't been before since the Super Bowl year when they went 2017 when they went and won the Super Bowl. So I'm really respectful of what he's done because I don't think he gets enough credit. I think people like A.J. Brown. I think people understand how significant he is. But when we have these conversations, this guy normally gets bumped out of the way. He kind of gets forgotten about because he's not as flashy. He's not on Instagram and, YouTube like Tyreek or some of these guys ahead of him that are like, he's not as much of a star as these guys when we have these conversations. So he tends to get left out. But if you're talking about a guy, if I'm using your criteria here, a guy that I want on my football team, like if I'm building a football team and I want a guy on my football team, A.J. Brown's towards the top of that list for me. You want guys like that on your team, and I think that's why he fits in pretty nicely at 7 here because I don't think he's as good as the guys in front of him, but I think he has just the demeanor, the physicality, and some of the athleticism that puts him in the same category as some of those guys. And this is probably the range that I really have him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I couldn't agree more. As a matter of fact, he's coming up here on my list shortly. So, I'm telling you to sell him to me, but that's not because you actually have to sell him to me. I think the guy is fantastic. When there was conversation about the Jets looking to acquire a number one wide receiver this past season, before 2022, before they drafted Garrett Wilson and so on, there was a lot of talk about were they going to go out and try and get Deebo Samuel? Were they going to go out and try and get any of these other guys from that 2019 draft class? And A.J. Brown was the one that I wanted them to go after. He was the one who I felt like had the most juice as a true number one receiver. And he probably suffered, if anything, from being in an offense where he wasn't. While he was featured as the number one receiving option, he was not featured as the number one offensive weapon, which is rare these days. It's not often that you get the number one receiver not be your primary offensive weapon. There's only a couple of offenses where that's not really the case, and he was on one. And during that run, you can't really blame him because Derrick Henry was doing unreal things, but ultimately, I think it just hurt the production a little bit and kept A.J. Brown's star a little bit less bright. And you said he's not as much of a star. I think he's just as much of a star as any of these guys. I don't think he's as flashy, if that makes sense. I think.
Oh yeah, star player, the skill for sure.
Yeah,
I would say like in the public eye when we have conversations, people forget about the guy that isn't in their face all the time. But for sure, you talk about his ability. Hell yeah, he's there. That's why he's gonna be top. He could be higher. I could really make a case for him higher, but I do want to be respectful of the fact that Smitty does afford him some more one-on-one possibilities than maybe some of these other guys. So I don't think he has to do it as harder as some of the other guys. But hell yeah, he's up there for sure.
He's a player that I have the feeling that he could be, he might even still suffer a little bit in terms of target share and how much he could produce. But at the same time, he's going to have better opportunities for championships. He's going to have probably more opportunity to keep his body healthier for longer if they're not force feeding him the ball. They're getting it to him in more select situations. And he comes up very clutch, right? Like if that offense ever is struggling, which it rarely is, you'll get a big play from him when it feels like just the necessary moment. And I think that's, you could talk about third down. You could talk about all kinds of stuff, but there's just a certain feeling that you only get when you're watching the game live as to how impactful a player truly is, how much of a spark he gives the offense. I don't think there's a way that you can describe it other than just it when you see it, and he has that. And I think he's right in the heart of his prime right now, right just the beginning of his prime. And I think we're going to see a bunch of really great seasons from AJ Brown. So hopefully he stays healthy and we get to all enjoy that.
Yep.
And yeah, again, I think with Hopkins, we kind of talked as much as we need to about him, but another very fun player who I think he's probably on the back end of his career at this point. I think he's always going to be productive for as long as he's in the league because he doesn't win with speed. And he wins with finesse, but it's not a finesse that I think will go away. And I don't think his hands will ever become less efficient or dominant. So I think he can still be a really great possession guy, even as he gets kind of well into his 30s. So as long as he wants to play, I think he's going to have a pretty substantial place in the NFL too. So that's one of the reasons that even though he's older, I tend to think that I tend to rank him a little bit highly going into the 2023 season. All right. So if you can believe this, at number 6, we actually have the same player. So you've got Waddle. I've got Waddle. This is the only situation in which I have a number 2 receiver as a top 10 ranked receiver here, because with him, really, I think it quite simply does come down to the fact that he was on the same team as one of the best offensive players in the entire NFL. And, he's incredibly explosive. His route running is becoming more refined every single year. His hands are great. He can do everything after the catch. He can get open before the catch. Like he's a complete receiver. And no, he's not very big. But again, as we move away from size being a requisite feature for wide receivers, he has everything else that you could want. And he's in the best possible situation, I think. I mean, maybe a quarterback who stays healthier would be nice. But in terms of the way the offense is built to feature him, I don't know that he could go to a better spot. And so while he may never have the same amount of production that he would if he wasn't on the same team as Tyreek Hill, in terms of how valuable he is and what he brings to the table, I don't think that's really disputable here.
No, especially when you couple what he did his rookie year with a terrible offensive system, offensive line you could argue was a little bit worse, and then a quarterback that was having to make much tougher throws and just operate at a much higher level because of the difficulty of the offense. He was still able to break the NFL all-time record for receptions by a rookie. So he went over 1,000 yards as well. He didn't have the yards per catch, and he didn't have the touchdowns that he had this year. But like we just said, when you add Tyreek Hill, you get to in another system where he's able to maximize his skill set. Then you see the production. But he ended up going from one of the guys at Alabama. I believe he averaged 19 yards a catch at Alabama, and that was one of his biggest traits. That's why he went so high. People thought he was going to be that, and then I think he averaged like below 10 his first season in the NFL, which showed you how like inefficient that offense was. And then he went back, and now he's at the top, and he led the NFL in yards per catch this season. So it just shows you his skill set, what he's able to do when he has it. And I've talked to guys on I have a couple friends on the Miami team. I have about 3 or 4 guys that I either play with or have met through other guys that I play with. And they all say that he's a better receiver than Tyreek Hill. We're talking about the details, the nuances, running the routes, getting the hands off of you, faking people out, getting this, all the stuff that I talked about earlier, the stuff that I really value and hold in high regard. They say he's better at those things than Tyreek. But it's just when Tyreek is that type of once-in-a-lifetime athlete, and he's that once-in-a-lifetime just yards after the catch kind of guy. I think Waddle is, even though Waddle has great yards after the catch as well, but you talk about a guy that stretches the field. I don't think there's a better field stretcher than Jalen Waddle in the NFL right now. When you talk about the guy you want just in the slot, the speed guy running down the field, getting mismatches, the guy you want on linebackers and safeties, there isn't a guy that you probably want more than Jalen Waddle. So I really do value I really do respect what he brings in terms of value. And also I think that there's a step that he can make this year if we're talking about physicality, adding a little bit of bulk to his frame. He's plenty fast. That speed is never going to be an issue as long as he's playing. I mean, you can even look at Deshaun Jackson. He's 35 playing. He's not as good as he once was, but he's still running by everybody. Like the speed isn't going to go anywhere. So I think he could take another step and add a little bit of bulk, maybe 5 pounds at most, because 5 pounds at most was a lot adding to your frame 5 pounds, 5 to 7 pounds of muscle, and maybe he can get a little bit better in those shorter areas of the field or those short yardage third down type situations. And you can see him maybe even take a step further. But with the production and the skill set, I think he has to be at least top 6 right here. So I like this spot for him when we're talking about overall skill sets, package, production. When you couple everything, he's probably firmly at 6 for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he's the best speed receiver in the NFL outside of Tyreek Hill. While he has many other attributes, if that's your key attribute, he does it better than anyone outside of Tyreek. And his ability to force you to try and squeeze these gaps between zones, and then eventually just leave other zones open, right? As you're trying to pass him off effectively, you stretch yourself a little bit thin, trying to make sure that he's just not like killing you in that intermediate area, then you're leaving yourself susceptible for where other guys are going to come in and then take advantage of that space that's been left open. And if you do leave him those gaps between zones, he's going to take advantage of that. He can get you crossing and then turning it upfield. He can get you deep. He can basically do anything. And I think size does hold him back ever so slightly, especially in contested catch situations. I think if there is one-on-one situations, I don't think that's a place where he's one-on-one 50-50 while the ball's in the air. I don't think it's a place where he's super strong.
Yeah.
And he's not the tallest either. And so that's one thing that Tyreek does better than he does, where he's so strong that, and his just athleticism and balance is so great that he does that a little bit better. But certainly near the top and would be a number one receiver on almost any other roster in the NFL. All right. At number 5, you have Jamar Chase, and I have A.J. Brown. So, obviously, like I said, Brown, a little higher on my list than yours. Certainly not a player that you've got to sell to me. I think that he's afforded luxuries being on the same roster as an incredible offensive line and great running game and Devontae Adams. But I don't think that any of those are necessary for him to be a great receiver. I think those are all nice things to have, and it's one of the benefits that you have when you're traded to the Eagles for a single first-round pick. But I don't think that he has to rely on any of those to be the great player that he is. I don't think that, I think that if we saw him go from almost any team where you're not primarily running the ball through Derrick Henry, any team that focused a little bit more on the passing game with a reasonable cast, you would have seen an explosion in terms of production just the same way that we did this year. I think giving him up for a solo first-round pick was a massive, massive mistake. It was shocking at the time, and his production has proven
especially
that
the way it happened. Now you go from that to having the worst receiving core probably in NFL history. I haven't been watching football long enough to say it's the worst in NFL history, but it's really bad. It's the worst I've seen in a very long time. So to go from having that guy on the roster, and you could have taken care of him, to that's another conversation for another day. But man, I couldn't believe that you gave that caliber of player up for that.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen players go for more, and you can make arguments against trading multiple first-round picks for different positions just in terms of leveraging your future, and how wise that might be. But if there are teams around the NFL who are willing to give up multiple first-round picks for a safety or a corner or whoever, whatever the case may be, you must have been able to find somebody to take him for more than a single first-round pick. It's shocking. But it is what it is, and that's probably one of the biggest reasons that John Robinson is not there anymore. What are you going to do? But an incredible player. Now, Jamar Chase, so he's another player. For me, I had him over some of the guys that you've got here, DeAndre Hopkins, Stephon Diggs, because I think we're almost forgetting how incredible he was as a rookie because he missed a chunk of the season last year. and the offense kept clicking without him. And yes, Joe Burrow is a phenomenal player. He's a truly phenomenal player. Maybe top 2, top 3 quarterback in the NFL right now. But Joe Burrow wasn't top 2, top 3 in the NFL last year. And Jamar Chase had one of, if not the greatest rookie seasons ever for a wide receiver. And I think that he was on a path to do something similar. I have no reason to doubt that until he missed time. So for me, you have plenty of respect on his name at 5, but for me, I have him a little bit higher. I guess maybe just going back to that first year that he had in the NFL more so than last year. So what has him at number 5 for you?
What has him at number 5 for me is just his athletic ability is generational. Like you talk about a guy that you just want to get the ball in his hands and let him work with. He's that guy. Like, and I don't think he's nearly as refined as. I mean, and that's why I have him so high. Probably would have had him lower if we're talking about just like purity of like. But I have to factor in the production. I have to factor in his yards after catch ability. I have to factor in the mismatches that he can create one-on-one. That's half the offense. Like I don't want to say half the offense. That's a significant portion of the offense. Just throw it up to Jamar. Joe Burrow has literally come out and said that. He said, "You know what? Jamar's down there. Throw it up, and he'll find a way to make it happen." The game against the Chiefs this year in the AFC Championship, without that fourth quarter bomb he just threw up on 4th down, the game could have gotten ugly. It was a job that they absolutely had to have. You had to have that conversion, and he did it. Like there's nothing he can't do on the football field. I would like to see him refine this route running ability because we all know as you get older, the athleticism will fade. You won't be able to run as fast. You won't be able to jump as high. You'll probably be able to, depending on how this situation goes with what they have at receiver, it could be a situation to where you don't have your guy T. Higgins there much longer. We don't know how that's going to shake out, but you don't know how that's going to happen. If that happens and they're able to show you a little bit more attention, you're not able to get as many one-on-one opportunities, then you really need to have that ability. So I hope he hones in and refines that. But like I said, there's nothing much more to this to me than this is a guy that you want to just get the ball in his hands in any kind of way, and he'll make it happen for you. So if it's a screen pass, get the ball in his hands. 50-50 ball, you're just throwing it up to him, get the ball in his hands. That's all you have to do. So if it's a guy where it's just that simple with him, I think you got to have him fairly high because this is the NFL. These are the highest caliber of athletes. This is the highest caliber of coaching and football brain and acumen. And if it's a guy where you just need to throw him a screen or just throw him a 50-50 ball and he's going to give you 1,000 yards a year, that's very, very, very rare. So I have to give him his proper respect there. Hopefully he continues to refine his game, and then he might even be higher or be the best.
Yeah, I mean, there is just a strength and balance and body control that he plays with. He's obviously very explosive. He's at a point where what he does will only last for so long, right? And that's what you're talking about in terms of the athleticism will fade. But it's you can be at a point in a few short years where the athleticism hasn't even really necessarily faded per se. But if that is exclusively what you're relying on, then at some point, even a small amount of diminish is still going to affect the production and the game quite a bit. So if he is able to play with more precision, I think that he, definitely has an opportunity to put up some of the best statistics of all time. And whether he's the best or not, that's a conversation to have later, but he certainly could rival stats, if not only because they're going to have the extra game to play for the majority of his career, right? That's going to help him out. That helped him out last year too. So with, over 1,500 yards as a rookie, what was his rookie season? 1,500, something like that? I'm trying to remember.
I think he had 13. I think he had 81 catches, 1,500 something yards, 13 touchdowns. Mm-hmm. That's pretty bad that I remember all that stuff, but it's like he had a very, very good year. So more than very good, but it was a special rookie season, and that's the thing. Like even with the injuries, like that's another thing that comes with those physical freaks of athletes. Sometimes your body's just not made to sustain that for very long. Like that's why a lot of these guys get injured. It's soft tissue stuff. He isn't tearing ACLs or popping Achilles. It's the hamstrings, it's the groins, it's the labrums. That's the type of stuff that's going to hold these type of guys back. So hopefully he continues, because he's plenty strong, right? But hopefully he continues to do the little things to kind of help quell some of these soft tissue things that'll keep him out for 3 or 4 games. Not going to end his career, but keep him off the field. So those are the things that I kind of worry about with him. But when he's on the field, man, it's really simple with that guy.
Well, I also think that, playing more precisely and, within the framework of technique more consistently is actually going to help you physically as well, because
Yep.
you're going to put yourself in less situations where you have to win due to outright physicality. You're going to put yourself in more positions where you can catch the ball with space around you, and even this year, after missing time, he still cleared 1,000 yards with 9 touchdowns. So, I mean, and how many receptions? Where is he? Jamar Chase. He's still like 80-some receptions, I think.
Yeah.
So, the production is going to be there game in, game out. And he is a game breaker, I think, against essentially any defensive back. I don't think there's all but the fewest guys in any given season who really have a chance of matching up effectively against him. And it's, aside from that, it's going to be double coverage and rushing the passer is your only chance to win. And he's going to have probably a few year stretch where that's just a guarantee just due to athleticism. But if he wants to be able to keep that sustained for a good 10-year run, then he will have to refine a little bit. And I don't know the player. I don't know the guy. Maybe that's already happening.
If he can keep the supporting cast around him, it will extend the life of his career as well. Not having to be just the solo guy when he can miss a game or two and it's not going to kill them. It's not going to take them out of the playoff hunt. It's not going to demoralize the team to that fashion. So I really do think the supporting cast, as long as they're there, can also help extend his shelf life. If we're talking about just target share and being the guy that has to take all the catches and take the screens and all the little dump off stuff that can get you injured and stuff like that. So I think that'll help him out as well. So he's in the perfect situation, and he is with the perfect quarterback that he played with in college. So very fortunate situation to be in for him.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And, we can kind of bypass some of that secondary conversation because he's my number 4 receiver here. So I feel pretty similarly about him. But that leads us into one of his former teammates now with the Vikings, Justin Jefferson, who is your number 4 receiver. So a lot of people have him among the top in the league, whether it's 1, whether it's 2. Most guys, I would say the majority, have him right up there. So what keeps him down at number 4 for you?
Well, it's nothing more than it's like okay, I don't have a problem, but Cooper Kupp has a specialty. He's exceptional at being in the slot, winning the little one-on-ones, the intermediate, the short route game. There's very few people that can stop him at that. Justin Jefferson is really good at a little bit of everything. But when it comes time to be a specialist, this is why I want people to go back and look at his stat lines, like the last 4 weeks of the season and in the playoffs. When it's time to be a specialist, when people are going to focus on primarily taking you out of the game, this is why I think they absolutely needed to draft Jordan Addison when they did, and why it's a home run pick for me, because I think they realized what's happened. Not happened because he still had an exceptional year, but what they need.
He only led the league in receiving yards.
Yeah, but maximize his ability. And when it's time to go win football games and win in the playoffs, when they're going to take you out of the game, this is why the Chiefs have been so dominant. They have a guy that nobody can account for in Travis Kelce. Without Travis, as great as Tyreek Hill was, as great as Patrick Mahomes, Kelce, that engine doesn't run. They have a guy that nobody can account for. And when you get to the playoffs, and even you looked at the Chiefs a little bit, they have 3 really good guys, but they don't have anybody that just one person that one team just can't account for. And I think that's what has made the Chiefs so good for so long. They have something that's what made the Bucks. The Patriots so good. Nobody could account for Gronk. So however deficient the receiving core was as a whole, you still had an exceptional mismatch that nobody could talk about. I think Justin Jefferson could be that guy if he was more of a specialist. If I'm talking about a guy that could just line up at X, he can go dominate the game in the same fashion that my number 1 can, or a guy like DeAndre Hopkins could, or if he could do the Cooper Kupp thing from the entire slot for the entire game. But they use him a little bit of everywhere. They scheme him open a ton. He has a very, very high target share. I'm not saying the numbers are skewed at any position. I have him 4th in the NFL. I feel like that's super high. I don't want to feel like I'm disrespecting the guy for the production, but it just I can't help but notice, when the going gets tough, when it's the end of the season and it's time to bite down, he always struggles. He always has the tough situations. And some people could say that's because he didn't have a great number 2 next to him. I mean, like some of these other guys, but I think that's what makes the guys that I'm talking about in my top 2 or 3 better than him, because they have similar situations and they're never the guy that's out of the game. They're never the guy that's not getting open. They're never the guy that disappears when it's time to win football games. So I think that's the difference for me between him and the rest of the guys that I have in front of him.
All right. So I'm just going to flatly put my argument for him on pause because it's going to come up here in a few minutes. But I hear you, but I'm gonna table that for about 10 more minutes, okay? And then we're gonna come back to him. All right. So that being said, we're gonna slide right into number 3, where once again we both have the same player, Tyreek Hill. So we talked about him a little bit just by way of the Miami conversation around Jalen Waddle. Both big fans of Tyreek Hill, what he does as a speedster, but also as a run after the catch player. As he honestly can be your number 1 receiver because he's strong enough and physical enough that he can get you those first downs when they need to happen, even in contested situations. He's maybe the most freaky athlete I have ever gotten to watch live, right? Like his speed, explosion, change of direction, start, stop, anything that you want to put out there that has anything to do with explosiveness is insane.
And he wins jump balls at 5'9". It's ridiculous. Like, I think there's a play from the Dolphins, the Lions game, where Tua is just running around and he's just making a play happen, and he throws the ball, and it's a little bit underthrown, but he's running for his life. And a guy like Tyreek, 5'9", goes over 2 DBs and makes the catch. You just don't see stuff like that. Like, so you said he's the freakiest athlete. I think it's no question in my mind, he's the freakiest athlete that I've ever seen on a football field. And that says a lot when you talk about he plays next to a guy that has arguably he has an argument to be one of the freakiest guys we've ever seen in Jalen Waddle as well. So when you have a guy that's so athletic and so freaky that he makes there's a clear separation between the next guy and it's Jalen Waddle, I think that says everything you need to know about Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Waddle, when you look at any player who has this level of speed, a lot of time that doesn't really translate to general success in the NFL, outside of being very specialized, is that usually straight line speed like that, you can't start and stop fast enough to have that actually function within a route tree, right? Like the only time that it ever really comes into play is when you catch the ball and you make a move and then you've got space and you can burn angles, or you just straight up beat guys deep. And even then, you still do need to have the ability to hand fight at times and then, stack guys and get really behind them, because these are other great athletes too.
Right.
But both of their ability to start, stop, change direction, and get almost immediately back into that top end speed is what makes them so unique. And Tyreek Hill is just a little bit better at that. And again, the mass that he's put on since coming into the league, where he came in initially, he wasn't this guy right away, right? He was return specialist, gadget guy, and he developed his body into this. So like there's a lot of credit to be given there outside of just the natural gifts. But when we see players who have this kind of ability to almost defy physics in terms of the way that most human beings are put together in terms of muscle mass and ligaments and what kind of torque they can handle, like when you see this, there's very little that you can do about it. And right now he's at the peak of his powers.
Another play that comes to my head is the Chargers game, the Sunday night football game, where they fumble the ball and then some kind of way Teron Armstead tips the ball out and Tyreek picks it up and he goes from the opposite hash on the left side of the field and literally runs backwards like it's backyard football, runs backwards, loses about 20 yards, and then comes back around the right end, and he's so fast and so quick that nobody can catch him and they score a touchdown off of it. That's the type of freaky once-in-a-lifetime athleticism that guy has. So when you look at little stuff like that, it really makes you appreciate how good he is and how much he brings to the table. So I really want to put Tyreek higher because I think that if Tua hadn't gotten hurt, he breaks the all-time receiver. I don't think it's a question about it. He came very close. Him and Justin Jefferson both came close. But if Tua doesn't miss a third of the games, I believe he missed 3.5 full games and then plus the playoffs. I don't think there's any question that Tyreek Hill would break that record. So it's pretty crazy to me to see the trajectory that he was on, especially after leaving Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. It was there was a big conversation about will he be the same player? Could the quarterback get the ball to him? So I think Tua and Tyreek answered a lot of questions, but Tyreek specifically, I think he answered the most. Like, he is that guy. He's that standalone guy. And I know he had Waddle next to him, but for him to make the transition and open up the Miami offense the way he did speaks volumes about how good he is.
Yeah, I do. And I think when it comes to the top 3 guys, you could basically roll the dice and I'd be fine with it in any which way. I think that if you wanted to rank Hill at number 1 and my other 2 guys at 2, 3, or wherever you wanted to slot them in, I don't think that it necessarily matters that much. For me,
to take it a step further for you, I wouldn't be mad at my top 5. If anybody has any of my top 5 at number 1, I wouldn't complain. And I would definitely contend Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, but how could you? There's not a lot of valid arguments for it. It's just preference at that point. But if you want to say Jamar Chase is the best in the game just because of what he does, there's not a lot I can say to dispute that, because these guys are all that close and together, in my opinion. It's just who can get it done the hardest way,
right,
and the toughest of the moments, and that's kind of the way I lean.
Right, and I agree with that, and I think that it's one of those things where, to me, the 2 guys that I do have at 1 and 2 have not had. Maybe they've had reasonable quarterback play, reasonable to very good, but they have not had the otherwise supporting cast in terms of receivers or threats to run the ball that. Certainly the offenses have been efficient and functional, but they just haven't had the same kind of guys to take the pressure off. And so I have, with my own eyes, seen them without somebody else to threaten defense. I have seen them do what they've done without that.
Right.
So segue straight in. At number 2, I have Devontae Adams and you have Stephon Diggs. And again, we talked about Diggs a little bit already. For him, he does get open very, very, very consistently. I don't really have a great argument against why he shouldn't be higher. It's just a feel. It's just a feeling, and he would have been in the top 3 for me in the past couple of years, even though he had less overall yardage last year. But I just felt like some of the yardage this year was just a little bit more, volume based. It just didn't feel like he was taking over games in the same way. It almost feels like my expectations are higher after 2+ years with Josh Allen in the same offensive system, that it should be easier, not harder, if that makes sense. So that's really all I can say about it, but I'm going to give you your time to talk up Diggs.
Well, Diggs is, and I don't have to go into detail about it because I've been saying it this entire time. Everything that I value, he embodies. Look at the steps that Josh Allen took. If you look at his game, right, not a ton has changed. He's a little bit better processing information. He's a little bit better with the deep ball touch, I would say. But the biggest proponent to Josh Allen making this giant step in his career has been the addition of Stephon Diggs. It's simple as that. Diggs gets it done the hardest way possible. They do not make it very easy for Stephon Diggs. I'm talking about from a schematic standpoint. They don't do a lot of the way they scheme Justin Jefferson open, the way they scheme Cooper Kupp open, the way they get he doesn't get a million targets either. He gets a lot of targets. I mean, let's not get it wrong, but he gets a lot of targets because he is the guy. So for them to not scheme him up as much as other guys, for him to have to do it against the division that he does it in, it gives even an added level of credential to me, in my opinion, because Stephon Diggs. Listen, this is very hard because I think my number 1, and it's very obvious who my number 1 is now, because I'm not going to not have Devontae Adams in my top 10. So I think you can make an argument Stephon Diggs is the best route runner in the NFL, and really take that into consideration. with the guys that we have in the NFL right now. There's guys that I didn't even have in my top 10, like Cooper Kupp, Terry McLaurin. You look at Amari Cooper, a guy that is exceptional runner out. CeeDee Lamb, who I think should be top 10, but that's how good the receivers are in the NFL right now. He is probably a step above those guys in the way he can get it done. I talk about the guy that can get it done at all three spots, but especially when he's just at X doing it the hard way against the best number one corner. He finds a way to get open, and he just does not miss his opportunities, man. So I think Stephon Diggs is that guy, and for that reason, I have him at number 2. And the production is very similar. I mean, he had you might be able to pull it up faster than me, but just his ESPN stats to show where he was in terms of catches, yards.
Well, yeah, 108 catches for 1,429 yards and 11 touchdowns. So, the targets, he was near the top. I guess it looks like maybe 4th in the NFL in terms of total receptions.
Yeah, so 4th in total receptions, 5th in total yards, 3rd in touchdowns. And that goes with the dry spells that, and I will give Josh Allen a little bit of bail because he did have the elbow injury. And I think that did hinder him for that middle stretch of the season when it was very difficult. So I do think that was very tough, but I do think I really do appreciate what he brings to the table. And I think that's why I have him so high because he has to get it done the hardest way possible, man. And I think that's why I have him so high.
Yeah, he also had less receptions of 20 plus yards than some of these other top guys, right? Like, Justin Jefferson's at 28, Tyreek Hill's at 25, Devontae Adams is 24, AJ Brown's 23, CeeDee Lamb is at 24, and then you got Diggs at 17. And 17 is certainly a quality number, but it's a little bit lower than some of those other top guys. I just felt like he was, getting the ball a little bit more often on slants. So that fed into his target share a little bit as well. And I just felt like, So the thing about Diggs is I don't think he's the best route runner. I think Devontae Adams is better. I think Cooper Kupp is better. But when you combine the physical gifts, the speed and explosiveness, I think that he's closer to those guys than the guys that will fall behind him. But he also has better speed than either one of those guys as well, which is one of the reasons that he was so effective as a deep receiver in the first few years. And this year it just felt like that was, he had a very high target share, but a little bit lower percentage of those were deeper receptions. And so it just, I don't know. That's really all I can say. He's still in the top 10 for me. He's still a very good receiver. So I'm not trying to diminish him. I'm just trying to give some kind of justification for why he's not in the top 2 or 3 for me. But great player. And there's no reason to doubt that that's going to slow down anytime soon. So, Devontae Adams, another story here. So I'll talk about him a little bit, then we can talk about him on your end as we segue to our number 1 guys. But best route runner in the game. He, to me, has the best understanding of spacing between himself and defenders, hands down. And that route running is more than just technique, right? It is an understanding of the exact moment when you cut, when the DB is not able to cut with you, right? He does that better than anyone. And part of that is the speed of his feet. So he may not have this tremendous straight line speed, but he might have the fastest foot fire out of any guy in the NFL, right? So like his ability to go 1, 2, 3 and be moving in a different direction is tremendous. And he doesn't have to go at this crazy speed to win that way, right? Like he can still threaten you deep, right? He's got requisite speed. And so you still have to respect it. But you can play him like he's running a short route, and it doesn't matter because he's still going to win that short route, right? He's going to drive into your chest the exact right amount, and then he's going to cut, and then he's going to get the ball, and then he's going to cut up field so quickly that as you're trying to tackle him, you're sliding right off of his body. I mean, anything that you want out of a wide receiver, he has. He can win deep. Does he win deep purely with speed? No, but he can double move you out of your cleats like better than anybody else out there. So it's so hard to match up with him in man coverage because the patience that it requires, the timing that it requires, the innate feeling and intuition that it requires is probably just never going to be as good as yours. Is probably never going to be good enough because his just is that great.
Yeah. And listen, man, everything that I talk about, this is how I feel about Stephon Diggs, why I had him so high. You take everything Stephon Diggs does well and you put it in a larger frame, and this is what you get out of Devontae Adams.
Mm-hmm.
Look at Devontae Adams' receiving core around him. Hunter Renfrow was out for most of the year. Who else? Darren Waller missed a significant portion of the season, and he still led the NFL in almost every identifiable category. We're talking about efficiency. The guys making the most out of their catches, making the most out of their targets, the yardage, the touchdowns. He is incredible at every level. He's the best receiver by a decent margin, in my opinion, and that says a lot because of how highly I value and respect the rest of these guys. Devontae Adams is just on a different level to me because everything that he brings to the table, he does it the hard way as well. I talk about, look at his quarterback situation. Derek Carr is not a bad quarterback. Derek Carr is as above average as above average gets. He's not a great quarterback. He's not an elite quarterback. He's not a bad quarterback. He's not even average. He's slightly above average, and look what he was able to do with him. Then you couple that with the fact that when Derek Carr had to miss those games, those last 3-4 games of the year when they didn't want to risk him getting hurt and getting all that money, look at what he did with Jarrett Stidham as his number one quarterback. I have no doubts that Jimmy G is going to feed this guy the ball and get him the ball. It's just a beautiful thing to look at when I watch him play. And I talked to, I have a good friend, Sean Reed, who covers the Raiders for The Athletic, and he talked with Josh McDaniels about it. He said he's never seen a player, and you think about all the guys that Josh McDaniels has coached. He's coached Tom Brady. He's coached on the team with all these great Hall of Famers. He said he's never seen a guy that makes his practice reps look as identical as they do in the game. He said it looks the exact same. And he said, and Tashawn was like, I've never seen a guy that looks like he's just going through the motions and he's working his ass off. It's just so smooth. It's so efficient. It looks so easy and effortless. But you can tell, like you talk about his feet. When I talk about finding the space, nobody finds the space better than him, with the exception of maybe a Diggs or a Hop. But when you're talking about route running ability, getting hands off, he does not let people get hands on him. That's one of the biggest things. For as smooth and efficient as he is, he's also extremely powerful. He's extremely strong for a wide receiver. Everything he does is just at the highest level. When I look at a wide receiver, if I'm building a prototype wide receiver, this is what it looks like. There were some doubts that he may not be able to translate the production without Aaron Rodgers. Because, listen, let's talk about Aaron Rodgers for a second. He is the top 3 or 4 quarterback of all time. I don't think there's much debate about that for now. Maybe after his career, 3 or 4 years from now, depending on how Burrow and Allen and Mahomes and those guys look, you might start to get muddled a little bit, and they might be throwing him in the same category as Aaron Rodgers. But Aaron Rodgers is one of the best. He's the second best of his era by far. So when you go from that guy to Derek Carr, and then from Derek Carr to Jarrett Stidham, and the one thing that doesn't change between all of that is your production, it speaks volumes about who you are as a player. And then look at the Packers receiving core this year. I know they had a lot of young guys, but look at the significant drop-off in production points, receiving touchdowns, all that they had. It's just another level. So I look at Devontae Adams, and everything that embodies a wide receiver to me, he does it at the highest level. And he has the God-given frame, size, a bit like athleticism, ability that some of these other guys do not have. So that's kind of the separation. He has the stuff that you can't teach, and then he's extremely refined and detailed at things that you can teach. And he's a professional's professional, and that's why I have him at number 1 for me.
So I do think that he is a little bit more reliant on effective quarterback play than some of the other guys, and I'll explain why. In terms of just baseline cracking 1,000 yards, he could probably do that with most middling quarterback play. But to be at the level of greatness that he has been, he does need a guy who gets the ball to him within the timing of the play. I think more than certain guys, maybe more than I think a Jamar Chase or a Stephon Diggs or even a Justin Jefferson is going to be a little bit more effective with lesser quarterback play, because what makes Devontae Adams so great is his consistency with getting open. Now, there might not be the same amount of separation as there are with some of these other guys, just because he doesn't have the same level of explosiveness as they do.
Yeah.
But he's going to be open a higher percentage of the time, basically every time. Like there's almost never going to be a play where he is not going to win the rep, right? If he is one of the early reads on the play, he's probably going to be open and he's probably going to be able to catch the ball and be effective with it. That's why he had such insane stats with Aaron Rodgers, because that's what he did, and Aaron Rodgers got the ball to him. But I think if you miss that window, like if you're slow coming off a read to him, or the timing or the accuracy isn't quite there, I think he can work with that, but I don't think it's going to be nearly the same level of effectiveness. And I think that's maybe one of the few things that would hold him back potentially. I think it's one of the reasons that we saw it take a little time in Vegas before he came on extremely strong to close out the season, because that timing wasn't quite there. It took a little bit of time. And that's even with a guy that he'd played with before in college at Fresno State. So I think that's really just the only thing that I could put in as a caveat for Davante Adams, because basically everything else he does at the highest of levels. All right. And that's going to take us into our number ones, which again, if you have anything else in the bank that you wanted to drop about Davante Adams, you're more than welcome.
No, that was it. The stage is yours for Justin Jefferson to make the case for him. But no, I said everything I need to say about Davante and how I feel about him, man. And that's about my preference, because everything I talked about, he has that in him and Diggs, plus the production. When you talk about the production, the gap between these guys is very, very small, especially considering the target shares, the way they have to get it done, all that good stuff that I talked about earlier. The production is still there to match my preference and style of play. So that's why I have them 1 and 2 respectively.
Right. So I get that. For me, when you look at Justin Jefferson, I think having him set up in beneficial situations on the move, pre-snap, in the slot, those are luxuries but not necessities for him, right? He did that a bit in his first couple of years, but that really wasn't how he was consistently winning as a rookie. It wasn't how he was consistently winning as a sophomore player, and he still cleared 1,400 yards in both of those seasons, right? Cleared 1,400 yards in 16 games as a rookie, cleared 1,600 yards in 17 games as a sophomore. And then he cleared 1,800 games in 17 yards this year, once Kevin O'Connell came in and kind of started to utilize him in a similar role to Cooper Kupp, right? Which it made all the sense in the world. But for him, unlike Kupp, I don't think that's necessary at all. I think he can line up at 99% of his plays and still clear 13, 14, 1,500 yards in a season. I really do. And I hear what you're saying about maybe not coming up in the big moments, but I would argue in a similar way that you were for Diggs that is more quarterback based. And as efficient as Kirk Cousins might be throughout the course of a regular season, when it comes to those clutch moments, I mean, there's a reason that, he has this stink that he doesn't play well in primetime games, right? And this is a long career that he's had at this point. Like that doesn't come from nowhere. And I think that's absolutely the case late in games as well, in big games. I think Justin Jefferson has, if anything, made him better in those moments because Justin Jefferson is so good at it. I mean, I think you look back into that game. I guess that was against the Bills. I think it was against the Bills. I believe that's the game where he had that insane catch where, it rivals the greatest of all time, where he's because he's not just falling backwards, he's falling backwards and the DB's got his hands on the ball and he still manages to pull it in with one hand. I mean, that is
the bigger thing about that catch is like
for me.
The stakes of the game Like that was, I think the Bills were, the Vikings were maybe undefeated or had one loss. The Bills were like had one loss, two losses maybe. At the end of the game, that was on the last drive. It was a fourth down. Like they absolutely had to have that play. So when you add that into it, I think that's easily one of the 2 or 3 best catches I've ever seen. But
so that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, he finished that game with. I'm looking at it right now. He finished that game with 10 catches, 193 yards, and a touchdown. That was like his second best performance of the year. The best performance he had was against the Detroit Lions in a loss, where he had 11 catches for 223 yards. So that's like, we talk about the production. The production is unreal, but that's also why I kind of like held it against him a little bit at the end, is because the last 3 games of the season he didn't play very well at all. That game against the the Green Bay Packers, even though they tried to say that game didn't mean a lot because they had already had the playoff clinched or whatever, but he played that entire game. He was in that game till the last drive of the game for the Minnesota Vikings, and he finished with the grand total of 1 catch for 15 yards. Then he followed it up the next week, 4 catches for 38 yards against the Bears in the game that they lost. And then the playoff game, he only had 7 catches for 47 yards. And the long was a 10-yard reception. So those last 3 games, he didn't play very well at all in the biggest of stages when they probably needed him to play the best. And that's kind of like why I looked at it from that perspective, is because that's when the number one guys, everything you've done in the season, like it's kind of like, I'm not comparing their total season, but like the situation with Tua, like where he had an incredible regular season. Then the last game he had a bad game against the Packers, and that he was carving them up until you can argue if he was concussed or not. But the last quarter of that game where he threw those 3 interceptions, that's the game that is stuck in people's mind, and it doesn't matter what you did the rest of the season. Same with Josh Allen. He had an incredible year last year, but the lasting impression people have with Josh Allen is the game against the Bengals in the snow, where he didn't play very well. He had one of the worst games of his career, and that's what people go off of. So I'm trying to only be consistent there in terms of holding everybody to the same standard, regardless of their regular season success. Because I think as great as he is, those are the moments where I want to see the best receiver in the NFL rise to the occasion and win those matchups. And maybe it has a little bit to do with the supporting cast. I don't know. We'll see here coming forward this year. They have Jordan Addison out. You have a first-round receiver. A lot of people thought he was better than Jackson Smith-Njigba. You know, I had him as my wide receiver 2 firmly. I think he's really good. I think he's Stephon Diggs-like. I don't think he's as naturally gifted as Stephon Diggs, but if you're talking about route running ability, I see somebody comp him to Calvin Ridley as well, which I think is a great comp. I think him and Ridley have a lot of similar abilities. So if he's able to open it up for him more, maybe we'll see some more of that late season, postseason success for Justin Jefferson. And I'm not counting him out. Like, I still had him top 4, I believe. I think I had him at 4. So I do respect him as one of the elites of the game. I just want to see it at that stage. And that's why I think all the stuff that I talked about when I talk about the refinement, the embodiment of being able to get it done regardless of the situation, the hardest way possible. If he can do that, then I mean, there's no question that he'll take a step from being one of the more productive receivers to the unequivocal best receiver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hear you. I think if you look at the stretch late in the year last year, I think the game against Green Bay, I think that was kind of a choke moment again, with you got a rookie head coach in there. They're doing really well. Like, high seed is on the line, and Cousins had a really bad game. He had a 58% completion percentage with 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. He took a couple of sacks.
Got abused. They got abused.
They got abused. And so, the 1 catch for 15 yards, you expect more. But then you look at the following week, I don't think that was a problem. I mean, Kirk Cousins had an 85% completion percentage rate that game for 225 and a touchdown with no picks. So I just, in that game, it didn't seem like a bad follow-up. I mean, that's still high percentage of the receptions, 4 of 17, but they just ran the ball effectively on an absolutely atrocious Bears defense and won 29-13. So it's like, for me, that's a one-off, really, more than a trend. So that's, what I would point out as far as that goes. And I really do just think that he's the best receiver in the NFL right now. He can win against anybody, and I think he's clutch. I think the route running is getting to the point where we can start talking about him in that truly elite tier, and he has all of the explosiveness as well. He's a thin frame, but he's still able to win contested catches. And I think coming up big is going to come down to, Cousins, because I don't think at this point in his career, which is, he was drafted in 2012. So I don't think, 11, 13 years, 12, 13 years later, he's suddenly going to develop a clutch gene. So I don't think that's ever going to change. So, it's probably going to be, tied to however long he's there. But I don't know. I think that we can prime ourselves for another truly incredible year from Justin Jefferson this year. And, aside from injury, which you can never really predict, I think he is the best of the best, if not very, very close up there. And I think when you add in the youth and the explosiveness, he's a really special player. And honestly, if there's a player who has a great opportunity to set the all-time receiving record, I think it's him more than anyone else, because that's the lack of refinement that we talked about with Jamar Chase. Jefferson's got that right now, so might save himself a few extra years as well. All right, so that's going to do it for us today, man. I appreciate you talking with me this evening. We are going to hop on and do a little film breakdown real quick for some offensive line tape, looking at one of the incoming rookies for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Excuse me. So we're going to go ahead and do that. But it's been fun. We will be back this Friday, not Thursday. We're going to be back this Friday to talk about corners. So we're going to go from wide receiver to corner. I believe Shane Carter is going to be on with me for that. But tomorrow you can check out our breakdown of Anton Harrison. Guys, find us on all the socials. I'm not going to repeat them all this time because I'm feeling a little bit tired. But we'll see you all very soon.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.